Welcome to Commander Central, episode 272, and today we're going to talk about what we don't like to brew when we're building new decks. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And Max, it's just the two of us today.
Just the two of us. We're recording on a beautiful Saturday morning before the heat wave hits us. Chris has to get ready to go run the card shop once again, so we're flying two-man today.
He's running the card shop today, and then he's on vacation with his family the next 2 weeks out of town. So it's actually probably going to be us for a good chunk of July, just you and I.
Yeah.
So hopefully we will stay out of trouble without Dad here keeping us in line.
That's what we say when you're gone.
Well, we're recording on a Saturday morning because I had a little work catastrophe yesterday. We had a piece of ransomware that came through that shut down our phone system. So it's not entirely my responsibility to deal with, but I was tangentially available to help out with a certain thing. So we had to postpone. And then this morning he said he's dealing with shop stuff, so he can't record. So yeah, that was an exciting Friday for me, more so than I wanted it to be going into the 4th of July weekend.
Yeah. I don't blame you. That does not sound like fun.
Did you play any fun games this week?
We played one last night.
We did.
You kicked our teeth in with a $25 elf deck.
Yeah, you weren't even there when I wound up winning it.
No, I had to use the restroom, and I come back, and you're offline, and I'm like, I assume we're all dead. They're like, we're all super dead. I'm like, okay, well, that's going to be my night, too. So I logged off shortly after that as well.
I wound up casting, I had Marwyn up to, I think, 17 counters on her, and I was able to cast a Soul's Majesty. So between, the buffs, it drew, I think, 21 cards. And then with the remaining mana from after tapping her for Soul's Majesty, I cast, I think, an Overcome and an Overrun and a Scale Up. So every elf was, base 6/4 plus 2/2 plus 3/3. And there's an old morph elf I have in there too that when you turn the face up, it gives your elves +2/+2. So they were all like 16/16s, and I had 20 of them in play or something. So the elf ball deck elf-balled successfully.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty rare when I play against an elf deck, and I kind of forget that you just have to be faster than it, because I felt like no matter what we did as a table, you always rebuilt so quickly.
Yeah, considering that deck costs absolutely nothing. Yeah, it played well, and I wound up playing at the shop on Tuesday night, and I kind of did the same thing. There's an old card from Ice Age in there called Malachite Talisman. That's an artifact. I think it's 2 colorless to cast, and for 3 green, you can untap I think it's a creature, a green creature you control, and you can only do that when you cast a green spell. But in a Marwyn deck, you can tap Marwyn for, probably 6 or 7 mana, cast a green spell, and an elf is probably cheap, use that 3 mana to untap Marwyn, and as long as you're able to cast a green spell, and that deck is pretty easy, then you can probably come out mana ahead untapping her, and somebody had to counter, they're like counting elves and counting, I can't believe I have to counter Malachite Talisman, but I have to counter it. It's just going to be too much.
It's a whole cycle. There's 5 of them. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
From way back in Ice Age. So it's actually pretty decent in that deck. So yeah, that was fun. I got to kick that off, and then I had to get up early this morning to deal with some stuff from that ransomware attack. So I played that one game as well.
Yeah.
And I went to the shop I mentioned this week. I don't remember anything terribly interesting or exciting that happened there in terms of games. It's just nice to get back and play, so I enjoyed that. And next week, we're going to get a couple games in with some listeners as well that are in town for the holiday weekend. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, it should be a good weekend. They all start kind of rolling in Sunday and Monday, so be able to get a lot of games in over the next few days, I think. And
I think you and I are going to go get a beer this afternoon. And
for sure.
And just hang out.
Yes, because we can do that now.
Yes, exactly. It's nice to be able to actually go see friends in a public place.
Yeah.
Well, if you out there in listener land want to tell us about any of your fun holiday plans, or share any cool games you played, or just say hi, how would they go about doing that, Max?
You can reach out to us on Twitter at CMDR Central. Hit us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. Email us at cmdrcentral@gmail.com, I think. And pretty much anywhere you Google us, you can find us.
And you can also find us on patreon.com/CMDR Central.
Yeah, head over there and check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play shows, which will be coming back here in July, along with maybe guesting on the show or just joining our community to chat and play virtual EDH with all of us.
And I just showed off the rough version of a new piece of art we're getting done to a couple of listeners we played with last night. That should be done in the next probably a couple days, and I can post it on Twitter, and I'm sure I'll put it in our Slack. I think we're going to use that for maybe the next version of the playmat, and maybe some t-shirts as well. It looks super cool. It kind of looks like the cover of an old D&D manual. This is something we wound up planning 3 or 4 months ago before the Forgotten Realms stuff came out, so it's just a happy coincidence that we have this done right kind of as the Magic D&D set is coming out.
For sure. Before I move on, we do have a handful of new patrons to say hello and thank you to. So first I want to say thank you to Adam Kokas, Jake Hughes, Matthew Blackburn, and Cody Zeitlow.
Thank you very much for supporting the show. And thanks to everybody who supports the show, whether it's supporting us on Patreon or supporting us just by listening and giving us those likes and upvotes. It means a lot, and we really appreciate it. So I just mentioned Forgotten Realms quick, Max, and I'm sure we'll probably wind up doing some kind of a review show on the set when it's fully revealed, along with the Commander decks. So what are you thinking so far about it from what you've seen? Because you're not a D&D player. You've played role-playing games a little bit, but like you're not a die-hard old-school D&D guy.
No, not at all. My role-playing games come in the form of a controller in my hand and a stat bar to adjust. Sure. I'm really digging it for someone who doesn't really like D&D. I get the concept. I get why people like it. It's not really my thing, but I feel like they're doing a great job of melding Magic and D&D with, bringing in these lore characters, but still making them feel like they're part of the Magic multiverse, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also really think they've done some neat tweaks, talking about things looking like old D&D art. There's a couple different versions of that in the set. So like we get alt art cards that look like old pictures from the old monster manual, or there's a couple of lands that look like the old modules you could buy for, a specific adventure. So like those kind of throwback things are super neat. Even if you aren't, like I wasn't someone who played a lot of D&D, but I played on occasion. So I at least see a little bit of that nostalgia, and I would imagine if you're somebody who played a lot, that is super cool.
Yeah, I love the whole thing we're doing with rolling D20s and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like, it's so cool, and by no means do I want to try a D&D campaign, but I can definitely see how this would get other Magic people to be like, okay, sure. I'll give it another shot.
And even little things like, there's a bunch of modular cards in the set, and they aren't functionally really any different than any previous modular cards. It's just the modes have names that are flavorful and reference D&D. So like, Golgari Charm that would destroy target enchantment or give creatures -1/-1 just has the 2 modes on it, right? All the ones in this set have names for the modes that like represent something that you would see in a game. So I don't have any in front of me right now, but like if it was one that gave you the option to either make 2 goblin tokens or destroy a creature or something, it would give you they would have names. So like make friends with these captured goblins or something else. It doesn't change anything at all, and I guess it adds more text to the card, but it's just interesting, like, right? It gives it a lot of kind of gaming flavor without really altering how anything plays, and I think that's a kind of fun addition to the game that feels really Dungeons & Dragons-like.
Yeah, I really like that, and I was super impressed with, it does feel like a core set with all these cards, all these legendary creatures. You typically see a bunch of those in the core sets, but these class-type cards for enchantments are... I didn't know how they were going to do these classes, because that's the one thing I know about D&D is you pick your class or your race and you go. I'm like, well, how are they going to do that besides just saying, this is a legendary creature human? Well, they just made cool level up cards, essentially. They're like level up sagas, and they're all super cool.
It's essentially the hybrid of a saga enchantment and a level up creature from back in the day.
Yeah.
And they are super cool. Yeah, that's been, I think, my favorite thing they've spoiled so far is those particular class enchantments. Those are super fun. Some of them are really powerful as well, so I am really looking forward to running a couple of those in decks. Overall, I'm just very impressed with this set so far. It's also something, too, where like I can just read it and enjoy it from a flavor perspective a little bit, and because we get so much stuff, right now, we're getting a new set every 2 weeks, it feels like, that I don't have to be too invested. It's a core set, too, so it feels like the power's a little bit lower. There's maybe a few less cards that I'm going to put in decks in, like, say, Modern Horizons 2 or something, so I can kind of casually enjoy it more than I have to spend a lot of time paying a lot of attention to it, which is also nice. It's just something that I can kind of pay attention to for fun.
Right. And, we still haven't even seen the pre-con decks yet
right.
for this.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think one of the legends from one of the decks got previewed on Reddit or something, so I don't know how legit it is, but if it's true, it's a cool looking card.
Yeah, so we're a week into this. We've got a couple hundred cards already, and we're like halfway through the whole process when you consider the commander decks as well.
Yeah.
It's pretty nuts. But it's fun. I mean, they are finding ways to keep us interested with, different things like this. So kudos to WotC for finding ways to keep us from getting burnt out, I guess. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we jump into this main show topic here?
Let's do it.
We're talking about things that we don't like to brew ourselves personally, and just maybe analyze that a little bit. Because we've talked about in the past plenty of times things we do like to do, but we haven't really talked about what we don't specifically like to do when we build new decks. And I build more decks than you, I would say, definitely on average, Max. You maybe put like one new deck together a year, I would say, is probably roughly what your rate is.
I would say yes, one in paper a year is perfect. I do some mock-ups on Architect, but it's not anything like you or even Chris does. So I definitely am not the brewer of the group.
So I'll start with myself, and I think I've talked about this before, but I can go into it a little more detail and explain why I don't like making 3 or more color decks. Because I just don't. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, I think. The first of which is I tend to feel like the 3 color combinations don't have as much of an identity as the 2 color combinations. I know exactly kind of what Selesnya decks look like, or feel like, maybe, to be a little bit more vague. I know what Dimir decks look like, and I know kind of what the play style and kind of vibe is. I don't think that's as clear cut necessarily with 3 colors. If you're looking at Sultai, it tends to be doing graveyard-y stuff, but that still just feels like Simic smushed in with Golgari. I mean, I'm not sure how much of that is a Sultai flavor so much as it is a combination of the colors that are in it. And I like my deck to feel like a thing. So the fact that the 3 color decks, at least to me in my perception, don't feel as defined as the 2 color deck kind of makes me shy away from those combinations. Another thing for me is, I try to brew in interesting ways and looking for unique cards and what have you. But like the reality is there's cards I put in every deck. If I'm playing white, I would be just being stubborn if I didn't run Swords to Plowshares. It's, maybe the best targeted creature removal spell they've ever printed. It's dirt cheap. You can always find a copy for 75 cents. So if I'm playing white, I'm going to put Swords to Plowshares in my deck. That's just what I'm going to do. If I'm playing, black, I'm going to run Knight's Whisper. It's super easy to cast. It's always puts you cards ahead. You can cast it on turn 2 and you can cast it on turn 15. It just is always a useful card to have in your hand. I'm just going to put it in every black deck I build. With a 2-color deck, the amount of those cards doesn't feel like I've homogenized my deck. So like the amount of cards that I feel like I'm going to put in a deck if it has these colors is, I don't know what the exact number is, say it's 7 or 8 per color. Well, if I'm building a 2-color deck, then we're looking at maybe a dozen to 15 of those cards that are probably going to be in the deck. That's enough for me to make the deck not feel samey. When I get to a 3-color deck and that takes it up to, 20 or 25, and then of course you have, your 30 lands in the deck, then we get to the point where I feel like my deck just becomes homogenized just because I'm running the same red cards that are on my red decks, the same white cards on my white decks, the same blue cards on my blue decks. For whatever reason, 3-color decks, I push over that threshold where it just seems like maybe similar to the theme where it's just a combination of the other colors. It doesn't feel like it's a unique thing. I'm just running the same cards I run in my, blue-black deck when I'm playing blue-black-red or something. So that's a thing too. There's like a weird threshold there where in 3 colors, I feel like the deck just gets too samey with the 2-color decks. Maybe that's a result of the fact that I have a 2-color deck as well. So like I have those 2-color decks and I'm overlapping. Whereas if I build, like right now, I don't have a Rakdos deck. So if I build a Rakdos deck, it's going to look different enough from any of my 2-color decks as well.
Right.
Whereas if I build a 3-color deck, I probably have all 3 pairs in that deck.
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense.
So that's why I just don't necessarily like 3-color decks. I think the other thing is that's where your mana base becomes super important, I think. Once you get to 3-color land, it becomes a way bigger deal to have really good fixing if you don't want to get told you can't cast this card in your hand. So for the most part, I think in a 2-color deck, we've gotten so many good dual lands and so many good mana rocks in the last few years that even if you're building on a budget, it's pretty easy to build a 2-color deck where it's just almost never a problem to have at least one of each pip that you need. And maybe if you're being super greedy with your utility lands that are colorless, you're going to get hosed on occasion, but like that's your own fault.
Dana? Who would do that?
You're right, exactly, exactly. But like even me, who is greedy with it, it just doesn't happen very often.
Right.
In a 3-color deck, that's not true. You know, I have one 3-color deck I play regularly, and that's my Crash deck. And it's obvious when I play that deck and have cards in my hand, I have to be way more careful with what I'm going to do. Okay, if I cast this spell, I have no choice but to use this one mountain, and that means I can't keep this one instant spell up that I only have one red to cast. Those things become way more limiting, I guess would be the word I would use, in a 3-color deck, unless you have just a perfect mana base. And I just don't like that. I don't like having cards in hand and being told I have to do this, and if I do, I can't do this, or vice versa. I just want to have whatever option is available to me at all times. So that's definitely very much a personal preference thing, but I just don't like being restricted based on the color of what I'm running. And it becomes much more difficult in a 3-color deck, I think, to just always have the right combination of mana that you need. So I also find that a little annoying and frustrating when I build 3 colors. So I think those are the main reasons I don't tend to brew 3. Do you have any preferences there yourself, Max?
I like you, I'm not a big fan of building 3+ color decks. I do have one similar to you. I play my Tuvasa deck. That's pretty much one of my go-to more highly competitive decks, but it's also super low to the ground mana-wise, like mana value-wise.
Sure.
It's all, every card in that deck, there's a couple that have 3 pips, but everything's single pip, maybe double pip of the same color, so the mana base issue, is a little easier for me versus something like if I were trying to build a Mardu deck, where I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Right.
I also think there's green, and green is a huge safety blanket for me when building decks. I like either playing green or I like playing white. And luckily I choose Bant and I get my third favorite of blue, so hey, good for me. My thing with building 3-color decks is all the generals seem really linear. Like, whenever you look at like a Jeskai commander, you're slinging spells.
Sure.
That has to be your playstyle. And, at least in Tuvasa, it's an Enchantress deck. It wants to be attacking. It wants you to play permanents. That's kind of more my playstyle. Sultai, like you said, a lot of them are graveyard shenanigans. Not really my thing. Abzan commanders tend to deal with +1/+1 counters and kind of can go infinite pretty easy. Again, not really my thing. So that's my biggest issue, is I haven't found a 3-color commander outside of maybe Tuvasa that I'd like to build. Like, it doesn't seem like you have to do this one thing.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but that makes sense when you think about it. Like, if each color of the 5 colors is restricted to doing, X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C, or whatever, the overlap between 2 colors is a lot easier to find when you're adding 3 colors in terms of like card design. When they're designing a 3-color card, they need to find one that overlaps between all 3 colors. And there's a lot less overlap space there. So when they find that space, it tends to be the same space they have to use for anything using those 3 colors for the most part, which I hadn't really thought of, but that's a good point. So that's probably why we wind up like that. But yeah, I think that's definitely true. 3-color commanders do tend to be much more samey, probably for that reason.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of mentioned this, but I also think when trying to build a 3-color deck, I get pigeonholed to be like, well, I want all the cards in green I like, and I want all the cards in white I like. Well, what out of blue can I still play in this deck? Well, I like playing counter spells, but that doesn't really fit into the theme of the deck, but I know I should have a couple. Right. So I feel like you get pigeonholed to being like, well, what color do you essentially like try to play less of in a 3-color deck or even a 4-color deck, just because there are so many great options, and you get stuck with, well, I'm down to 4 slots left in my deck and I know I need at least a counter spell and maybe a ramp card. Well, what would you rather have, a ramp card or a counter spell type of situation? And I don't like making those decisions, so I just stick to 2 colors.
No, absolutely. Decision paralysis is a real thing, and when you're at 3 colors, there's a lot more of it, let alone 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So what do you have here, Max, for something that you don't like to do when you brew?
I don't like building monocolor decks.
Oh, okay.
Not for the same reason as like the 3-color stuff where all the generals feel like you're doing one thing. I like a lot of monocolored generals. I like playing mono green. It's just, I like having that backup color to have answers. In Selesnya, I can run stuff like Generous Gift and Path and Swords, where if I'm playing mono green, I just get a bunch of fight spells, essentially, as removal, are just big stompy creatures, or in your case last night, 1,000 elves, which killed us all.
Right.
So, yeah, there are definitely ways to make up for the lack of removal of a color in said color, but sometimes there isn't. Mono
Yeah.
black can't deal with a lot of stuff. Mono red can't deal with a lot of stuff. Mono blue can't deal with a lot of stuff when it comes to, like, permanent removal. It's all bounce. So, like, I see it kind of as a choice of, like, I kind of look at your Talrand deck, it's a bunch of cantrips and you win with tokens. Really cool idea, but, compared to, like, the 99 counterspell Talrand deck that you're typically used to seeing, So I just feel like monocolor generals speak to me, but I feel like there just isn't enough support unless you are playing, like, mono green.
Yeah, I can see that. That doesn't bother me. The restrictions, like, okay, when I build a black deck or mono black deck, I understand I just can't deal with, for the most part, enchantments and artifacts. There's I guess a couple things now that deal with enchantments, but I'm fine with that. I'm just like, embrace that. Okay, it is what it is. I just have to run straight ahead, and if I hit a wall, I hit a wall, but hopefully I will leave a hole in that wall shaped like me, like a cartoon character or something.
Kool-Aid Man.
Right, exactly, yeah. And I'm fine with that kind of restriction, so I guess that's a strange thing. I'm okay being told the deck can't ever do it, and I understand that. What I don't like is being told maybe I can do it if I have the wrong amount of mana, like in a 3-color deck. So yeah, in a mono deck, I'm fine with that. It doesn't bother me at all, but I get why that is a thing people don't like, because they are much more rigid in the problems you can solve, for sure.
I also feel like monocolored decks, you tend to have to play a little bit of, like, a combo. So, like, whenever I run into mono black decks, I kind of anticipate maybe a Mikaeus, Triskelion setup, or, some sort of graveyard looping, just because that's a way to, keep the game in your court versus letting your opponents walk all over you. And I feel like, yeah, I do like to play some combos in my 2-color decks, but I feel like those are kind of obvious. The ones you would probably play in mono black or mono blue, the extra turn stuff, it just gets boring. Like, it just doesn't sound like fun for me to play or have my opponent sit and watch me do.
Well, yeah, your win cons then become limited, and you even get weird situations where, True Conviction is a win condition in a white deck, but it's way less effective in a mono white deck, where the creatures tend to be small. White Weenie is an archetype. You get soldiers. I guess in an angel deck, if you're playing mono white angels, it's different, but True Conviction is a way better card in a Selesnya deck, where you might have big beater green creatures that giving them double strike and lifelink is so much more impactful than it is with, a handful of soldiers coming in. Or if you're playing a, white black deck or even a Boros deck, where then you've equipped up some creature, or you're running a dragon or something, that double strike is, and lifelink is way more effective there. That's why. So the diversity you get from playing more than one color definitely helps. Number one, you have twice as many win condition options because you have twice as many colors, but you also have twice as many ways to make those win conditions into actually effective win conditions. To use white again, Approach the Second Sun is a fantastic card. It's a straight up win condition in white. It's way easier to find that if you're playing Azorius and you have the ability to dig down than it is if you're playing mono white.
Or even cast a mystical tutor or a personal tutor and just go get it. Like,
in the first
place,
so much easier. Exactly. Yeah, that's very true. I would agree with that. It tends to be tougher, and you're right. There's definitely, like, good mono decks that have win conditions, but they do tend to be combo based. The new Heliod has a couple combo wins, but if you don't play combo, it is much trickier in a mono deck for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll pop back to me here, and this is one since I can say this since Chris isn't here, and I guess it's also changed. So I will explain why I don't like red as a color.
Okay.
And why I've come around on that. The first one is kind of silly, but really it did bug me for years. The original color red, and I literally mean the color on cards, that old kind of maroon that you saw on red cards, bothered me. I know that's goofy, but it looked like a scab. It's the color of a scab, right? I mean,
I have a few of them on my body right now, so yeah, I'll agree with that.
So for whatever reason, I just like mentally that kind of put me off red way back in the day. I also think, again, particularly early on in Magic's design, red was kind of a dumb color. You just cast lightning bolt or fireball, or it was very straight ahead. At least to me, it felt like it didn't require a lot of planning or skill to use well. And if you want to tell me I'm wrong, I will believe you. But I'm just saying, my perception, right or wrong, was in my head, red felt like just a dumb kind of mindless way to play Magic. Right or wrong, that's what the perception was. It's like if you're on a date and the first impression you get of your date is like her picking her nose. It doesn't matter how like classy or cool she is. It's a pretty tough thing to shake when that's your first impression. And just my first impression of red as a player back in the day was it felt mindless, and I just didn't like the literal shade of the color on cards. And that was just a very difficult thing for me to get past for a lot of years. And when I talk about red being mindless, to a degree, it even extended to the creatures you had in red. You had, hey, dragons are awesome, but they're just like big balls of fury coming at you. They weren't characters necessarily. You had a bunch of goblins and orcs and kobolds, particularly in Magic's early days, that were just kind of like, they were very much the comedy creatures of Magic. Like, how many old pieces of flavor text have, goblins blowing themselves up or whatever, which is funny, but it like wasn't necessarily very cool. Versus, green is kind of a mindless beater color too, but like at least elves have a civilized society, and they were, there were actual characters there. So there was just a lot of reasons that to me red felt kind of mindless as well. Again, right or wrong. And I had a tough time shaking that perception of red. So like for a lot of years, I just didn't like building red. Now I mentioned that's kind of changed. And it has. Number one, I think the physical color of red now is much less bothersome to me for whatever reason, as silly as it is. And I really like the impulse draw mechanic in red that red has for card advantage now, where you exile, 1 or 2 or 3 cards, whatever it is, and then play them till end of turn. I think it's super flavorful. I think it's a skill check in a lot of ways. It's a unique feeling thing to red. I think that mechanic almost all by itself is one of the things that has won red over for me and made it something I enjoy playing. I just really like that mechanic, and it's the kind of thing that almost any red deck that you're playing, you can put it in there. Light at the Stage is a great card no matter what you're doing, and so that's what's turned me around on red. But if you look at the amount of decks I have, I just have less red decks and other colors, because at least for a lot of years, I really didn't enjoy brewing with red.
Okay.
Is there anything in particular, Max, like any specific one color you don't like playing?
There's a couple 2-color pairs I don't like playing, and that's Dimir is always going to be the number one. There has yet to be a Dimir commander that speaks to me. I've tried plenty of them. I had a Scarab God deck. I had a Gisa and Giralf deck. I don't know. I'm not a fan of playing with my graveyard. Sure. I know, shocks the world. I had a Vela deck for a while, before you. I think it's one of those things where everything in Dimir feels the same. Sure. Or you need to have a lot of moving parts to make the deck work with whatever commander you choose. And that's besides, like, the partner with anyone partners, because I'm sure you could do something interesting there. But, a lot of them are either about, stacking your graveyard full of stuff to bring it back, or using your opponent's graveyard with, Rexiel, or it's zombies with, like, Grim and Gisa and Giralf. So, like, nothing really feels combat damagey to me, and that's kind of how I like to play. So, versus something like, even Boros, I feel like it's combat based, but it's faster. I feel like there's less moving parts when you put a Boros deck together than trying to put together a Xeris Sand list, something like that.
Well, and you mentioned one of the things you don't like with monocolored decks is the restrictions and what you can deal with. Those are the 2 colors that have the most restrictions. Neither blue nor black has the ability to remove artifacts or enchantments, for the most part.
Right.
You counterspell and bounce, I guess, and there's a few individual spells over the last couple of years that have hit them. But for the most part, it's the color combination that has probably the most vulnerabilities as well. So if you find that frustrating in monocolor, I'm sure that definitely probably carries over there as well.
Yeah.
Any other 2-color pairs that you're really not into?
For the same reason, Rakdos, like, nothing speaks to me, and kind of what you just mentioned, both of those aren't good at dealing with a lot of stuff. Yeah. So I don't have ways to answer, and that's kind of how I like to play. I like to be able to have answers and play a little bit of a tempo control style, no matter what colors I'm playing.
Okay. Well, any other specific brewing dislikes you have here, Max?
As I've looked through all my decks prepping for this, I realize I don't like playing Planeswalkers.
Okay.
So I don't run any in Dramoka because none of them fly. Well, I used to run Sarah the Benevolent, but that got cut for something better. I guess Brago plays a bunch of them, but I can abuse them with Brago's flickering them and resetting them. So that's kind of the outlier here. I don't run any in Tuvasa, even though there are a handful that deal with enchantments. In Regna and Krav, I run Elspeth Sun's Champion just because it's so good. Like, it
Right.
makes tokens, it blows up the board. But otherwise, I don't run planeswalkers in my decks. I don't know why. I just think maybe they tend to be either too powerful, or they tend to not do enough for me. And I think that's been what I found in the past is, geez, I haven't played a card in 2 or 3 turns. I guess I'll run this planeswalker out and it'll be dead by the time it comes back to me,
Yeah.
It's different compared to maybe like a 60 card format where, you're only 1v1. You can probably make that planeswalker last a little longer than in a multiplayer game. And there are plenty of cool planeswalkers that can be your commander now since Commander Legends, but I think they put a target on you, whether it's just one or a whole deck full of them like you have with Dejaru. But we talked about this last week with Chris. It becomes kind of a mini game of do you take care of the planeswalker or do you take care of the player? And I don't want to be in that mini game. I don't want to be the subject of that mini game. I just want to play other cards.
Yeah, I don't run very many planeswalkers in my decks either. I think part of that is I really like my decks to do something thematic, and while there are some planeswalkers that very clearly suggest a theme, on average they don't. They tend to be just a value engine that doesn't really care about what the deck around it is. So I think that's part of the reason I shy away from them. You can put Mono Blue Narset in any deck able to run her, and she's going to be a good card.
Yeah.
Therefore, I don't have her in any of my blue decks. She just isn't caring about a strategy other than she's just really, really good. The Ashiok for the Spark is the same way. Elspeth, if you're playing a token deck, she's obviously maybe on theme and really good, but there's very few situations where she's not a really good planeswalker too.
Right.
So you're just it doesn't matter what your list is. If you put an Elspeth in it, I would have a tough time telling you you're wrong for having it in there.
I 100% agree. And, I think another thing is everybody, at least how I like to play my planeswalkers when I do play them, is I just want that emblem. How can I get there fast enough? And so typically that means if I'm in green, well, maybe I should consider putting a doubling season in here. Well, then how many planeswalkers should I run to make a doubling season worth it? So it's kind of like a mechanic almost, where I'm running this card, so I should run some proliferate stuff. Well, then how many slots do you dedicate just so you can help this one card? I think planeswalkers tend to have that same effect of, well, if you're in green and you're running 2 planeswalkers and you have a doubling season, well, why not put 3 or 4 more planeswalkers in there, since you can probably alt all of them the minute they hit?
Yeah, very much. There's a lot of cascading changes that happen when you start putting those into decks, for sure.
Yeah.
So the next one here I will throw out for me, and we've joked about it, and it's been joked about plenty of times by people I play with about me being a hipster deck builder in terms of what commanders I want to build. I don't think that's entirely accurate. I guess it seems that way, but I mentioned I'm just gonna run Swords of Plowshares. I'm not looking to be fancy and try something else. It's a great card. I'm just gonna run it. I'm not that obstinate about it. However, I do have a reason for brewing that way, and it's not just about being a hipster. One of the things I like about Commander most is I like that it can be a way to express creativity. I just don't have a lot of those in my life. I work in IT. There's just not a lot of room for creative expression in the IT field. So this is one of my ways to do something interesting, and brewing is that. And if there's a gazillion decks that look the same that I'm going to see on a weekly basis, that makes it feel less like I've done something creative. I'm absolutely sure I could build, and that even applies to just the commander itself. I could find a Golos deck brew, I'm sure, that doesn't look like many other people's Golos deck brews, but it's still going to be Golos, and you still see plenty of Goloses, and I just that detracts from it for me. I had built a Kenrith Exalted deck a couple of years back, which I've never seen another Kenrith Exalted deck before, but it was still Kenrith, right? I still saw plenty of Kenriths. He's a very popular commander. And that made it feel like it wasn't something that, for whatever reason, and that's probably in my head, but it just felt like it wasn't something that I created just because that commander was so popular. So that's something for me, at least, that makes a difference.
I don't know if I would fall as drastically into that profile like you do, but yeah, I'm kind of the same way. When I do build a deck, I don't build the newest thing. I don't build the newest commander out of the core set or the newest commander from Zendikar Rising. I'm the guy building the commander from, Commander 2017 finally, because it's been 3 years and nobody plays it. And I also, you and I kind of think the same way about this, is it sucks when you get to your card shop and everybody pulls out the same commander because it's the hot fresh thing. Well, I don't want to sit and play a 4-player pod of everybody playing Kenris, whether they're all different or not, So I think that also plays a fact in it that we have a regular, large meta we play in person now that we can, and this applies prior to COVID, when our EDH nights have 24 people, and they all have the newest commanders, or semi-newest commanders, you don't want to be kind of shuffled into the herd.
Right.
Everybody built this. So, that's why I wait a year to build a commander, because typically people change it out for the next best Rakdos commander, the next best green-white commander. Cool, I'll go back 4 sets and build that one now, because no one else is playing it.
Kind of as a parallel to this, too, I like the commanders, too, in addition to not being super popular, I like to try to find a unique way to brew them. That's not always possible, and it doesn't always matter. It's Reki History Kamigawa, my Reki deck. Pretty obviously, you're putting legends in there. Like, it's not like I've found a unique way to build Reki. It's just an unpopular commander that nobody runs, and it just so happens to work really well. So that's fine. But one I remember fairly recently was Riel the Everwise from Ikoria, and she's the commander where if you were to discard cards, you draw them many cards instead. I remember seeing Riel and be like, oh, that's super neat. You can turn, a bunch of red's looting effects into a card advantage. So you can run a bunch of cards that you maybe wouldn't otherwise run and come out ahead with Riel. That's super, okay, cool. And Riel also isn't like one of the more popular commanders in that set. I could put a Riel deck together. But then the problem is, I feel like that Riel deck would, even if I didn't see a lot of them, it would still wind up looking like every other Riel deck out there.
Yeah.
Because that's just so obvious and such a clear-cut way to brew that deck that I don't know what I would have to add to that conversation, so to speak. I always think about when a band covers a song, you want your cover to be something that stands out. And, when Jeff Buckley covered Hallelujah, he found a way to make it his own. Or when Johnny Cash covered Hurt, he found a way to make that into a Johnny Cash song. What are you going to do with Hurt at this point that wasn't done by Trent Reznor or Johnny Cash? What are you going to do with Hallelujah that wasn't covered by Leonard Cohen or Jeff Buckley? You better have something to say if you're going to do that. And that's maybe sounds silly, but I feel the same way about a deck. What am I going to be able to do with this commander that's going to have something to say that hasn't been done by every other person building that commander for the most part?
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. I never thought about it like the covering a song, but that's a great way to think about building an EDH deck.
And again, if that's not how your brain works about decks, I'm not judging you for that either.
Right.
It doesn't. If that's not important to you, that's perfectly fine. I don't hold anyone else to those standards necessarily, but it's just one of those things that matters to me. So that's something that I take into consideration when I brew, and it's something I definitely don't like. Any other ones from you here, Max?
No, I think I covered most of the ones I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think I primarily did too. One point I guess I will make too about this that I think has been kind of interesting the last few years. Let's jump back to 2017 or something when a new set would come out. First of all, we had 4 or 5 sets a year maybe, and those sets would have sometimes no more than 5 or 6 legends in them. We actually had, I think it was Core 2015, didn't have any legendary creatures in it at all. And there were some that only had, one for each monocolor set for the core sets. There were some of the of your smaller sets, when small sets were a thing, that only had a couple legends in them as well. So when there's only 5 sets or so coming out a year and they only have a few legends in them, and everyone around you rushes to brew that new cool thing, if you were someone who kind of got bothered by people building the same deck as you just didn't have options. You definitely had to wait. We talked about waiting and not building the newest thing. Flash forward to 2020 or 2021, where we're getting 7 or 8 new sets a year, and pretty frequently they have 20 legends in them, very, very often.
Yeah.
That is something you can do now. You can look at the newest that came out and be like, I'm going to build this legend. And there's a pretty good chance no one around you has brewed it, because there's already been 90 new legendary creatures that came out this calendar year. There's it's diluted the pool a little bit, and in a good way, I think. So there's just so many more choices that you don't necessarily have to be in a situation where, hey, everyone built Atraxa in 2016 because it was a strong, interesting commander that came out, so everyone brewed it. You still get some of that stuff, but when Atraxa was one of 34 legendary creatures that year versus, whatever commander you take, for example, from this year, it's one of 170 to come out. That's a whole different deal too. So like if you are someone who's bothered by everyone building a deck around you, that's definitely less bothersome now than it was 5 years ago because there's just so many choices.
Yeah, that's a great point. I will throw this out here. M14 was the one with no legendary
M14,
creatures.
okay.
M15 is the one that had the 5 monocolored and then Sliver Hive Lord.
Oh, okay.
That was 15.
That was 15. Jesus, we're getting old, yeah. Max.
15 had the Chain Veil.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, yes, we're getting old, Dave. Yes, we are. And you made a great point. When they started introducing the uncommon legendaries back in Dominaria, 3 years ago, 2017, that I never thought about. Yeah, you're diluting the pool, and now that we get, I'm looking at the Adventures from the Realms spoilers here on Scryfall, and there are tons of legendaries in this set that aren't rare. They're all uncommon, and sometimes the uncommon ones are the cool ones that have that unique ability that you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Or they have that ability that's super easy to build a deck around. I think of like the Rakdos clown from Commander Legends, where whenever you sacrifice it, it gets a +1/+1 counter. +1/+1 counters aren't typically a thing in Rakdos, so having a commander that does that is pretty cool.
Yeah, we just got a preview of a mono green dragon that lets your stuff make treasures. So ignoring how weird that is in green, it's a unique thing, certainly in green. So like if that's something you want to build, you can build a deck that doesn't do what any other mono green deck is doing for sure.
I mean, green is the best color in Magic, and now that it has treasure support, I think that solidifies my argument, everybody. Now we're just waiting for that true green counterspell, none of this Veil of Summer stuff.
It definitely does plenty of things for sure. Well, so we're interested in hearing back from any of our listeners out there what things you guys don't like when you brew, what things you avoid and why you avoid them. Because I think it is interesting to hear because I think a lot of this is just personal preference, right? I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with anything being universally true, but I think it is an interesting topic to hear why people don't like what they don't like when it comes to brewing up new decks. So reach out to us and let us know. That, I think, is going to wrap up episode 272 of Commander Central. We will be back next week, just Max and I, since Chris is going to be on vacation, with another show. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next week, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.